In a heart-pounding moment, Ariel and Judah, two young lions, launch a relentless ambush on their unsuspecting prey, zookeeper Jen Brown. With lightning speed, she's brought to the ground, suffering devastating injuries that send shockwaves through the entire zoo. Jen's desperate cries for help echo through the compound, summoning her colleagues to the lion's den. As they race against time, the two powerful males loom over Jen's limp body. Can they reach her in time, or is it already too late? Don't miss a beat. Hit those like and subscribe buttons. This is Fierce. Australia's Shoalhaven Zoo in New South Wales is home to a vast array of native and exotic animals. Set in 16 acres along the Shoalhaven River and 80 miles south of Sydney, the zoo is a popular tourist attraction. But for 35-year-old Jen Brown, it was her place of work. She was a zookeeper and was entrusted with working with the pride of 4 lions. 2 of them, 18-month-old males named Ariel and Judah, had celebrated their first birthday just 6 months earlier. They were a popular exhibit, and Jen had tremendous respect for them. In 2020, the zoo was closed due to the COVID pandemic at the time, but normal animal husbandry protocols were still followed. There was still an enormous amount of work to be conducted at the zoo to maintain the 100 or more animals kept there. On a regular morning in May 2020, Jen went to clean the lion enclosure, a job she'd done many times before. While she worked inside, the lions were supposed to be in a different area, safely locked away. But on that day, something went wrong. The gate that should have kept the lions away from Jen didn't close properly, and she didn't notice. When her back turned, she didn't see Ariel and Judah, 2 young lions, sneaking up on her. They were curious about her, as they'd never been near a human before. Without any warning, they jumped on Jen, biting her head and neck. Jen was completely caught off guard by the sudden attack. Each of the lions had sharp claws, some as long as 1.5 inches, which cut through her back. They also had special claws for gripping prey. Those dug into her shoulder. All Jen could see and hear were the lions growling and biting. She could feel their warm breath on her face. She fought as hard as she could, trying to push the big cats off her, but they were too strong and too determined. It was a scary situation, and Jen was struggling to stay safe. Their canines, each 7 centimeters long, crunched down around her skull. They pierced skin and flesh and threatened to crack bone. She felt the power of the bites, the incredible force with which they bit down, and the pain began radiating out from her open wounds. Luckily, her cries were heard by 2 of her colleagues who rushed to the scene. What they saw haunted them. It was like something out of a movie, and they felt powerless to stop it. But as soon as they yelled and beat the metal bars on the enclosure, the 2 lions leapt off Jen and trotted back to the other section of the enclosure. Thankfully, they didn't stand their ground or show aggression to the others when they rushed at them. Jen was fading fast. She was semi-conscious at the time, but was losing blood rapidly. Her colleagues secured the lions away and ran to her aid. Then came the heart-stopping call over the zoo's radio that there had been a lion attack on one of the keepers. Staff at the zoo had been trained for such an incident. Each member of the staff knew their roles to play. With no members of the public inside the zoo because of COVID restrictions, all staff were able to deal with the emergency situation quickly. At 10:20 that morning, only 20 minutes after Jen had stepped foot into the lion's den, the emergency services were on their way. The response was rapid. Details were vague, and nobody in the emergency services knew what they would find when they reached the zoo. All they had been told was that a zookeeper had been mauled by a lion and was in a serious condition. 4 ambulance crews and a helicopter arrived at the zoo. Faye Stockman was the first paramedic on scene. The ambulance was directed to the lion enclosure, and she was ushered inside it by zoo staff. She described it as one of the worst calls she has ever experienced. She was terrified as she stepped forward. Somewhere there were 2 lions who had just attacked a human, and on the ground lay the young woman fighting for her life. It was a harrowing scene, and one that Faye will never forget. She said it was the most terrifying moment of her life. As a paramedic, she had learned to expect the unexpected, and had encountered all sorts of unusual emergencies before, but nothing could have prepared her for that day. Stepping foot literally into the lion's den, her heart was in her mouth. She looked down at Jen, covered in blood and barely awake. She had deep lacerations to her neck, face, and head. Paramedics worked on Jen for 2 hours to try to stabilize her before she was carried out of the lion enclosure. She was then driven a short distance to a helicopter that airlifted her to St. George Private Hospital. Her colleagues were left shocked and distraught. They didn't know if Jen, a popular and well-liked member of the team, would make it. Jen arrived at the hospital in stable but critical condition. She underwent an emergency blood transfusion and was pumped full of antibiotics to stave off any infection. Surgeons sealed up her gaping wounds, but it would be days before news of her improvement was made public. As news of the incident spread across the country, Nick Shilko, the zoo's owner, was immediately pressed on the fate of the 2 male lions, but he was reluctant to make a decision until all the facts had been examined. His main focus was on the well-being of his shocked staff and any updates from the medical team at St. George Private Hospital about Jen's condition. Hundreds of calls to save the lions were made to the zoo, each member of the public pleading not to euthanize the lions. Jen has remained secretive and conservative about the attack that nearly cost her her life. But despite the physical and emotional scars the struggle left her with, she has no resentment toward the animals. She loved lions and knew the risks of working with them. 3 years later, after grueling and extensive rehabilitation and recovery, Jen is back working with the big cats. There's nowhere else she'd rather be. In the end, the 2 male lions responsible for the attack were spared. They had only been acting on instinct, and it was a terrible accident. Rigorous external inspections of the zoo's safety protocols and procedures were conducted following the incident, and some changes were made. In the annals of the same zoo's history, this wasn't the first instance of an animal's untamed instincts breaking free. Rewind to 2014, when a fearless zookeeper named Trent Burton found himself center stage at the crocodile exhibit. The star of the show, a formidable male crocodile, fittingly named John, eagerly anticipating his mealtime. As Trent cautiously enticed the crocodile out of the water with a succulent piece of meat, a heart-pounding moment unfolded before a transfixed audience. With a lightning-fast lunge, the 3.7-meter-long behemoth clamped its mighty jaws around Trent's hand. The crowd watched in breathless shock as a life-and-death struggle ensued, culminating in Trent being unceremoniously dragged into the water. In an astonishing twist of fate, the crocodile abruptly released its grip, and Trent managed to swim to safety, escaping with nothing more than minor puncture wounds. It was a harrowing reminder that even within captivity, these majestic creatures retain their primal instincts, lying dormant but ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Working in such close proximity to these apex predators is a constant tightrope walk of risk and respect. In the blink of an eye, an apex predator can transform any situation into a life-or-death scenario, leaving its prey at the mercy of untamed instincts.